agreement or concord happens when a word changes form depending on the other words to which it relates. It is an instance of inflection, and usually involves making the value of some grammatical category agree between varied words or parts of the sentence. For example, in Standard English, one may say I'm or he is, but not I is, or he am. This is because the grammar of the language requires that the verb and its subject agree in person. The pronouns I and he are first and third person respectively, as are the verb forms am and is. The verb form must be selected so that it has the same person as the subject. The agreement based on overt grammatical categories as above is formal agreement, in contrast to notional agreement, which is based on meaning. For instance, in American English the phrase the United Nations is treated as singular for purposes of agreement even though it is formally plural. By category, agreement generally involves matching the value of some grammatical category between different constituents of a sentence. Some categories that commonly trigger grammatical agreement are noted below. Person equals, agreement based on grammatical person is found mostly between verb and subject. An example from English has been given in the introduction to this article. Agreement between pronoun and antecedent also requires the selection of the correct person. For example, if the antecedent is the first-person noun phrase Mary and I, then a first-person pronoun is required. However, most noun phrases are third-person, and are replaced by a third-person pronoun. Number equals, agreement based on grammatical number can occur between verb and subject, as in the case of grammatical person discussed above. In fact, the two categories are often conflated within verb conjugation patterns. There are specific verb forms for first-person singular, second-person plural and so on. Some examples: I really am versus we really are, the boy sings versus the boys sing. Again, as with person, there is agreement in number between pronouns and antecedents. The girl did her job versus the girls did their job. Agreement also occurs between nouns and their modifiers, in some situations. This is common in languages such as French, where articles, determiners and adjectives agree in number with the nouns they qualify, les grands whom versus les grands whom's. In English this is not such a common feature, although there are certain determiners that occur specifically with singular or plural nouns only, one big car versus two big cars, much great work versus many great works. Gender equals, in languages in which grammatical gender plays a significant role, there is often agreement in gender between a noun and its modifiers. For example, in French, les grands whom versus la grande chaise, such agreement is also found with predicate adjectives, l'homme est grand versus la chaise est grande. In the case of verbs, gender agreement is less common, although it may still occur. For example, in the French compound past tense, the past participle agrees in certain circumstances with the subject or with an object. In Russian and most other Slavic languages, the form of the past tense agrees in gender with the subject. There is also agreement in gender between pronouns and antecedents. Examples of this can be found in English: the man reached his destination versus the ship reached its destination. For more detail see gender in English. Case equals, in languages that have a system of cases, there is often agreement by case between a noun and its modifiers. For example, in German, der gute Mann versus des guten Mann, e.s. In fact, the modifiers of nouns in languages such as German and Latin agree with their nouns in number, gender and case. All three categories are conflated together in paradigms of declension. Case agreement is not a significant feature of English. Agreement between such pronouns can sometimes be observed: who came first, he or his brother? Versus whom did you see, him or his brother? By language, languages can have no conventional agreement whatsoever, as in Japanese or Malay. Barely any, as in English. A small amount, as in spoken French. A moderate amount, as in Greek or Latin. Or a large amount, as in Swahili. English equals, modern English does not have a particularly large amount of agreement, although it is present. All regular verbs in English agree in the third-person singular of the present indicative by adding a suffix of either s or is. The latter is generally used after stems ending in the sibilants ch, ss or zz, present tense of to love. There are not many irregularities in this formation. To have, to go and to do render has, goes and does. The highly irregular verb to be is the only verb with more agreement than this in the present tense. Present tense of to be, future tense of to be, emphatic future tense of to be. Note the use of shall and the use of the emphatic tense are rare in standard English. In English, defective verbs generally show no agreement for person or number. They include the modal verbs, can, may, shall, will, must, should, ought. In early modern English, agreement existed for the second-person singular of all verbs in the present tense, as well as in the past tense of some common verbs. This was usually in the form ist, but st and t also occurred. Note that this does not affect the endings for other persons and numbers. Example present tense forms, thou wilt, thou shalt, thou art, thou hast, thou canst. Example past tense forms, thou wouldst, thou shouldst, thou wast, thou hadst, thou couldst. Note also the agreement shown by to be even in the subjunctive mood. However, for nearly all regular verbs, a separate thou form was no longer commonly used in the past tense. Thus the auxiliary verb to do is used, for example thou didst help, not thou helpedst. Latin equals, compared with English, Latin is an example of a highly inflected language. The consequences for agreement are thus, verbs must agree in person and number, and sometimes in gender, with their subjects. Articles and adjectives must agree in case, number and gender with the nouns they modify. Sample Latin verb, the present indicative active of porter, to carry, porto, I carry, porters, you, singular carry, portat, he carries, portamus, we carry, portatis, you, plural carry, portant, they carry. Note also that the inflectional endings mean it is not necessary to include the subject pronoun, except for emphasis, or to avoid ambiguity in complex sentences. For this reason, Latin is described as a null subject language. French equals, spoken French always distinguishes the second-person plural, and the first-person plural in formal speech, from each other and from the rest of the present tense in all verbs in the first conjugation other than all are. The first-person plural form and pronoun are now usually replaced by the pronoun on and a third-person singular verb form in modern French. Thus, nous travaillons becomes on travail. In most verbs from the other conjugations, each person in the plural can be distinguished among themselves and from the singular forms, again, when using the traditional first-person plural. The other endings that appear in written French are often pronounced the same, except in liaison contexts. Irregular verbs such as être, faire, olla, and avoir possess more distinctly pronounced agreement forms than regular verbs. An example of this is the verb travailler, which goes as follows: je travaille, to travails, il travaille, nous travaillons, or on travail, vos travaillez, ils travaillent. On the other hand, a verb like partir has, je pars, to pars, il part, nous partons, or on part, vos parties, ils partent. The final s or t is silent, and the other three forms sound differently from one another and from the singular forms. Adjectives agree in gender and number with the nouns that they modify in French. As with verbs, the agreements are sometimes only shown in spelling since forms that are written with different agreement suffixes are sometimes pronounced the same. Although in many cases the final consonant is pronounced in feminine forms, but silent in masculine forms. Most plural forms end in s, but this consonant is only pronounced in liaison contexts, and it is determinants that help understand if the singular or plural is meant. The participles of verbs agree in gender and number with the subject or object in some instances. Articles, possessives and other determinants also declined for number and for gender, with plural determinants being the same for both genders. This normally produces three forms: one for masculine singular nouns, one for feminine singular nouns, and another for plural nouns of either gender: definite article, la, les, and definite article, un, des, partitive article, du, de la, des, possessives, mon, ma, mes, demonstratives, say, set, says. Notice that some of the above also change if the following word begins with a vowel. La and la become la euro squared, do and de la become de la euro squared, ma becomes mon and say becomes set. Hungarian equals. In Hungarian, verbs have polypersonal agreement, which means they agree with more than one of the verb's arguments, not only its subject but also its object. Difference is made between the case when there is a definite object and the case when the object is indefinite or there is no object at all. Examples: seridk, suritum, setlek, serit, surity. Of course, nouns or pronouns may specify the exact object. In short, there is agreement between a verb and the person in number of its subject and the specificity of its object. See definite and indefinite conjugations. The predicate agrees in number with the subject, and if it is copulative, both parts agree in number with the subject. For example, a car paragraph nivaka copyright Rodikesk Voltak. The books were interesting. The plural is marked on the subject as well as both the adjectival and the copulative part of the predicate. Within noun phrases, adjectives do not show agreement with the noun. For example, a sa copyright p car paragraph navir tekel. With your nice books, the suffixes of the plural, the possessive your, and the case marking with are only marked on the noun. Scandinavian languages equals. In Scandinavian languages, adjectives are declined according to the gender, number, and definiteness of the noun they modify. In some cases, predicative adjectives appear to disagree with their subjects. This phenomenon is referred to as pancake sentences. Slavic languages equals. Most Slavic languages are highly inflected, except for Bulgarian and Macedonian. The agreement is similar to Latin, for instance between adjectives and nouns in gender, number, case and animacy. The following examples are from Serbian: Angstrom 3/4 ivim malam stanu. I live in a small apartment. Angstrom 3/4 ivim malachkale. I live in a small house. Imam Malistan. I have a small apartment. Imam malakleyu. I have a small house. Imam melogza. I have a small dog. Verbs have 6 different forms in the present tense, for 3 persons in singular and plural. As in Latin, subject is frequently dropped. Another characteristic is agreement in participles, which have different forms for different genders. Ja sam gila. I was eating. Ja sam gio. I was eating. Swahili equals. Swahili, like all other Bantu languages, has numerous noun classes. Verbs must agree in class with their subjects and objects, and adjectives with the nouns that they qualify. For example, katabu kimaja katatosha, mishunwa moja utatosha, chungwa maja litatosha. There is also agreement in number. For example, vitalbu viwalai vitatosha, misunwa miwalai itatosha, mishunwa moralai yatatosha. Class and number are indicated with prefixes, which are not always the same for nouns, adjectives and verbs, as illustrated by the examples. See also, case government, declension, inflection, redundancy, sequence of tenses. Sometimes called agreement of tenses, synthetic language. References. Further reading: Corbett, Greville G. Agreement. In Asher, R.E. The Encyclopedia of Language and Linguistic. Oxford, Pergamon Press. Pages 54-60. Corbett, Greville G. Agreement. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. ISBN 9780521011700. Gierverkubden, Tami. Syntax. A Functional Typological Introduction. Vol 1. Amsterdam, John Benjamins. Chapter 10. Melouk, Igor. Aspects of the Theory of Morphology. Berlin. New York, Mouton de Guita. Chapter 1. Moravsik, Edith. Agreement. In Greenberg, Joseph. Universals of Human Language. Vol 4. Stanford, California, Stanford University Press. Pages 331-374. External links: Agreement, a Bibliography, Tiberius, Carol. Dunstan Brown. Greville G. Corbett. Surrey Database of Agreement. University of Surrey DOI, 10.151261.